then. So welcome to today's session, which is exploring AI and the new 42001 standard. As I said, microphones are on mute purely from a sound quality point of view. Please do use the chat box as we go through with any questions or queries or anything that you might have. I will be monitoring them as we go through today's session. My name is Flora Neville, and I'm going to be sitting here in the background keeping an eye on all the chat and all the rest of it. And we're very fortunate today to have Sarah and Peter joining us. So I'm just going to pass you over firstly to Sarah to introduce herself, and then on to Peter. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schlobam. I'm head of AI at the Citation Group, of which ISO is a member. I am not Amy Farrah Fowler, but I do have a PhD in particle physics, which is where I first started using AI over 20 years ago now. I'm also a former auditor. I worked for PwC. I've worked in compliance at some of the largest banks in the world, like HSBC, and now I'm very excited to be helping out at Citation as well.
Fabulous, thanks, Sarah.
And myself, hi guys, my name is Peter Johnston. I've been with Citation for just over 2.5 years now. I've been working with ISO and different ISO standards now for just over 25 years, as crazy as that seems. Been working a lot with 27001 for the last 10-12 years now, and actually working with the 42001 standard since about late 2022, once the draft standard was getting close to the end. So about close to 2 years now I've been looking at the standard. So hopefully we can provide some insights today.
Fabulous, thank you guys, and we've got some serious expertise here today, which is fantastic. Delighted that we can have you with us. Okay, so who are we? I know some of you are familiar with Citation, and some of you may not be. So we have over 60, we've got more than 60 plus consultants nationwide. We've been going for over 30 years in the business, and it's very much about tailoring that management system for your business. We give you the complete support, so everything you need to achieve and maintain your ISO certification, and we've implemented over 30,000 management systems. So it's helping you to get it right, to have the right things in place, and gain that qualification and sustain your accreditation as well, and certification. So, and we are there to support you every step of the way. So it's very much from your point of view, helping you to get it right. You might also have come across other members of our brand family. We are part of the Citation Group, and you know, we can provide a variety of other services as well that you may need at some stage to elevate your business. So we have a variety of different aspects there as well if you ever need it. Okay, so what we're talking about today then, and I'm just going to pop up a quick question actually to kick off. So the first question I'm going to ask you today is nothing too tricky, don't worry. Who has used ChatGPT or similar AI assistant? So either you've never heard of it, or you've heard of it but you've not tried it, used it for personal life, used it for work, or used it for both work and personal. So tell us. There's no test, there's no, don't worry, it's just so we've got a clear understanding of who we've got with us today, and to make it as relevant as we can to you as well. So okay, lots of you have used it, so which is great to see. 65% of you have used it for both work and personal. A few of you have never heard of it, so that's you'll definitely have heard of it and have an understanding by the end of today, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to just share those results so we can see there. 8% never heard of it, 13% heard of it but not tried it, 4% used it for personal life, 8% used it for work, and 67% used it for both. So you understand the benefits, and you know, the opportunity there is the key thing. And what I'm going to talk about today then is giving you an introduction to AI and machine learning, the evolution of sorry, I'm just going to take away share those results now. The evolution of artificial intelligence, how AI is being regulated as well, an introduction to ISO 42001, and how you can get certified as well. So we're covering quite a lot of ground today. So as I said, use the chat box as we go. Feel free to pop any questions or queries in there. We may take some of them as we go along, but if not, we've got an opportunity at the end to take them as well. So brilliant. I'm going to now hand you over to Sarah, and she's going to take you through the first part. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Flora. We could go on to the next slide. So let's all start from a common ground. Sounds like an awful lot of you have used it, both in personal and work life, which is good if you're thinking about an ISO certification. But what is AI? What do we mean by that? Well, it's a way of sort of instructing machines to do stuff, to do computations, to make predictive texts and emails and all sorts of things, but without giving them explicit step-by-step instructions, right? It differs from computer programming. You don't have to say, if this, then that, if all that thing. While it uses algorithms, it tends to do this in a more somewhat autonomous way. So you give it loads of past data, for example, and it learns from that to say, okay, this is what we expect to see in the future. And the concept has actually been around quite a while. We've been talking about a lot of it recently, but we've been talking about it since the 1950s. And you might have heard of the fella Alan Turing, as seen in some excellent films, and a big figure in Manchester, which is near where we're based. He asked, can machines think? What would a machine have to do to trick you into thinking that it's human? And that's known as the Turing test. So go to the next slide. We can think a bit more about that. What AI isn't. What AI isn't, it isn't Skynet, right? What you're using when you're using it in ChatGPT, it's not this big thing that's going to take over everything. We're not in the Matrix, right? We're also not in other sci-fis. We're not quite at the level of very human-looking androids yet. We're not at the level where a robot can clean your entire house for you, although we do have quite a few more things like robotic vacuum cleaners. And it's not the end of the world. It's not as big of hype as some people have made it out to be. But it will change what we're doing. If we go to the next slide, we can see that AI has been around for a while, and it really starts where modern computing starts, at Bletchley Park cracking the Omega code during World War II with Alan Turing. Those are some of the first machines there. As we progressed, we started to use it to crunch not just numbers, but also language. And some of the earliest natural language machines was like this one called ELIZA in 1964. And even then people started saying, like, attributing almost human feelings to it, and thinking of the machine as an entity, which I think is quite interesting. There have been predictions about the level of sort of human intelligence that we'll reach for a long time. Obviously, some really great classic sci-fi from that era, Arthur C. Clarke, Stanley Kubrick, all sorts of great predictions happening in those eras. But where it really started to come to life, and well, where I start remembering it, if you think about back in the 90s, right, the big puzzle we were trying to solve was chess. So they trained the computers to play chess, and they thought, you know what, yeah, it's good, it can learn the rules, but it's never going to beat the grandmasters. Well, in 1997, Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, who was the best in the world at the time. And since then, basically on full strength, that a human can't beat a robot at chess anymore. We also got some big leaps and bounds ahead when we started using voice agents and all of the things that we put into our iPhones now. Computers used to be a thing that you exclusively sat down to do. Now you walk around with them in your pocket, and arguably they're listening to you. They're waiting to say, hey Siri, do something. And that really changed the way we interact with technology on a daily basis. That was a big shift. Become a little bit more recently, after chess, Go. So there's this great game, really, really popular in China, called Go. It involves flipping over these little black and white tiles. That for the longest time, people thought, you know what, that one's more of an art than a science. You'll definitely never be able to train a machine to to play at Go. And Google, with their AlphaGo, which uses a really cool reinforcement learning system, finally beat the experts at that in 2016, which is also about the same time you start getting Sophia the robot, this quite human-looking kind of creature. I saw her speak once. It was a strange experience. But why are we talking about AI now? What if it's been around this long, how come in the last couple of years AI has absolutely exploded? Well, that's thanks to our friend ChatGPT, which has come from OpenAI, and that was launched to general public on November 30th, 2022. Go to the next slide. That was just the biggest product launch in history by pretty much any metric that you can think about. This is the most successful product. It's in everyone's houses, it's in everyone's pockets. People who aren't techie people that you would think of, the people who have the latest toys, it's not necessarily them that's using it. It's pretty much everyone. And if you just look at the time it takes to get to 1 million users for each of these things that we now think of as fundamental to our lives, Netflix took 3.5 years to get there to 1 million users, and ChatGPT did it in just 5 days. So that was the big difference. And the technology had been advancing in the background. There were applications using it, but the thing that they did really well was put a really nice user face on it and let people use it for free. And that has just then sent everyone else into an arms race to release the latest model. Every tech company is now trying to compete and say, oh no, this is the Google one, this is the Amazon one, and some other competitors as well. So go to the next slide. It might pop up in areas that you don't realize you're using it. So if you go to ChatGPT, you're really conscious that you're using ChatGPT, and there's so much you can do with it, right? I mean, I'd encourage you to give some of your own examples in the chat. You can get it to plan holidays, do recipes, do notes, emails, all sorts of things in your personal life. You can help it to plan DIY projects, all sorts of cool stuff. AI also pops up in SatNav. It pops up in product recommendations. What do you want to read next based on people who look like you, based on your past history. Also used for fraud detection. So I worked in a bank, and we were trying to fight financial crime with data science. And we looked for all of those automated detections to say, yeah, this is unusual behavior. And a lot of that was driven by AI. The flip side of that, of course, is that the criminals are also using it. So particularly in cyber areas, it's very easy to now mimic a tone of voice, or you might even see videos. If you've seen that image of like the Pope wearing a puffy coat, it's getting increasingly hard to know what is absolutely true and what is AI generated in some areas. So if you go to the next slide. We think about what AI can do and what it can't do, right? It's really good at repetitive stuff. So the example that I always give is if you kind of do it on autopilot, if you could do it a lot faster by throwing 100 interns at it with some basic instructions, it can make some simple decisions for you. AI has been doing that for a while, and that's been in things like credit scores, all of these things that we saw on the last slide. That's been in place for the last 20 years easily. Where it's getting better now is it can support with more in-depth analysis, problem solving, creativity. Generative AI means that it can generate new content, stuff that it's never seen before. That's what ChatGPT is doing. So rather than being able to predict within a very narrow realm of experience, now it can just create brand new stuff, new images, and yeah, some of the things people create with DALL-E, the image generator, are just fantastic. But the one thing it's never going to replace, and the thing it's never going to touch, is sort of real, genuine human interactions, because at the end of the day, we're still humans using technology. So if you think about where are you using AI in your business, you want to target those repetitive tasks, those boring bits, the things people don't really want to do, they don't entirely switch their brains on for, and you still want to make sure that humans can get to humans when they need to. On the next slide, with all this great possibility, right, how are we going to manage this, right? We can do things bigger, faster, stronger, right? But that means they can also go wrong bigger, faster, stronger, and in really significant ways. So obviously people are starting to think about, well, hang on a minute, this is a really powerful new technology. How is that going to be regulated? In the UK, so far, we're kind of talking about, well, it needs to be handled by regulatory bodies within specific industries. But the big legislation that's just come out that a lot of people are talking about is the EU AI Act. And the easiest analogy I can give is it's kind of like GDPR, but for AI systems instead of data. And like a lot of parts of GDPR, it follows a similar model. So it's got that same quite intentional overreach of scope, right? So it applies to anyone who is trying to put a product into Europe or is dealing with European citizens or, pretty much can find Europe on a map. It's trying to catch you in its scope quite intentionally. And what tends to happen is when an EU law like that comes out, other bits of the world start to come along, especially, California will copy it, and then the rest of the US will copy California. With GDPR, there's the UK GDPR version. So I expect to see a pretty similar trend in terms of adoption. And it starts phasing in over the next sort of 6 to 24 months. So it is something that you don't have to panic about it right now, but it is something that is coming. And if it's not this, there is probably some regulation coming. Either the UK is going to specifically align with it like we do with GDPR, or the regulatory bodies for various industries will probably look to it for guidance, because there's been a lot of expert consultation on it for a really long time. And again, with that quite intentional overreach, there's a chance that you're still in scope with it if you're dealing with European citizens at all. And with that, the fines are even bigger than GDPR. It can be 7% of global turnover, I think no cap on prohibited practices. But that's not so bad, because most of what's in it is promoting good practice. So if you look at the guidance that you see, the UK's AI Institute, the Alan Turing Institute, the recommendations that they have around fairness, accountability, transparency, the EU AI Act tries to put that into law and tries to give some ways to actually enforce that. So what does that mean? What are we talking about with that good practice? Well, if we look on the next slide, so there's a couple of things that you really need to know. So you need to know when you're using AI. You need to know what AI systems you have. So you might think that's obvious, but like I gave those examples before, there may be AI happening in the background of something, or a lot of features are switching on now in platforms that you already have. They're putting in their AI Copilot. So the obvious example is Microsoft Copilot. It's not great, actually, but it is something that most people have heard of. It's an existing product, but it's added AI features. You need to know about that, and you need to document it. So Salesforce is switching on Einstein. Databricks have one. Pretty much any digital platform you're using now is adding an AI element if it didn't have it already. So like any system that you have, you need to have good management practices around them. You need to think about, the risks and the impacts that can be happening about that. You're going to need to train your teams. You're going to make sure that folks have a good awareness about AI and what you're doing. I think just like pretty much everybody these days has a yearly GDPR training, I wouldn't be surprised if that starts to extend to AI training. Because that's a big responsibility under the Act, and it's still really good practice. What does that training mean? Well, it's generally talking about what are the risks. So there's all of the data risks still that you need to think about. You still need to think about GDPR, but generative AI, for example, introduces the risk of hallucination. It can, when it's generating stuff, it can completely make stuff up. And so you need to be aware of that and how to control for it, but people need to know that can happen before they can do anything to mitigate that risk. Under the EU AI Act, you also need to think about, are you a provider or a deployer? But what is your level of impact with AI? Are you the one who built it? Did you completely build this machine from scratch? In a lot of cases, probably not. But even if you're a deployer, you still need to know what you're doing and record some of that. I think the thing that is important, and the thing that really does try to address some of the unethical practices in the use of AI, is to make sure that you don't do any of the prohibited activities. So it's a fairly sensible list of things like, don't try to create a social score, like a credit score. Don't try to use real life biometric information. So you don't want to be like Minority Report, just scanning the crowd and identifying people, with some exceptions for law enforcement. But generally speaking, these are sensible things to not do, and are the kind of things that are going to prevent us from building Skynet, hopefully. And then there are extra activities if you're so there's prohibited activities, there's high risk activities, and then kind of everything else after that. You can still do the high risk activities, but you need to be a bit more careful about what you're doing and what you're recording. There are extra reporting requirements around there. So is it a lot of effort? Yes, but is it good practice in terms of things that you should be doing anyway? I think it is there. So we don't have to directly comply with it. Thinking about how to manage our systems is a very important concept. And one great way you can do that is with ISO 42001. I'll pass on to the next slide.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That is fantastic and a good, really great insight there. So I'm sure those of you who have never used it now have a much better understanding of AI. Okay, so we're now going to hand over to Peter just in a second to talk us through about ISO 42001. I'm very quickly just going to ask you here, do you currently have any ISO standards in your business? Just a yes or a no. Pretty simple, yes or no answer. So looks like lots of you do, which is fantastic. Okay, so 80% of you do. So 80% of you currently have ISO standards in your business and 20% no. So great, fantastic. I am going to hand you over now to Peter to take you through the ISO 42001. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll just move to the next slide. So what we'll start with is a quick overview of what is ISO 42001. And the first thing to understand is that it's a structured framework. So it's not a golden bullet. It's not going to solve every problem in one go. But what it actually is, it's a model, it's a framework, it's a set of guidelines that for businesses to ensure that you safely, ethically use AI, ensuring things like transparency, accountability, reliability. So it's all about giving you that framework that then allows you to build and implement and use AI in a safe way. Who was it developed by? Well, it was developed in conjunction with two organizations. One was the IEC. They do a lot of work developing standards for electrical and electronic products, systems, that kind of services. And it was actually done in conjunction with ISO. It's important to know that it's ISO, not ISO. And if you're dyslexic like me, you might not have realized that ISO is not actually an acronym of the organization's name because they're International Organization for Standardization. It took me a few years before I spotted that, trust me. And it actually doesn't come from the name of the organization. They realized when they first put the organization together that if you translate it into different languages, the acronym would change every time. So what they did was they chose ISO, which actually comes from the Greek word of isos, meaning equal. So that's where it actually came from. And that's who developed it, those two organizations working together. What's the purpose? As I mentioned, with regards to the framework, the purpose of it is to build this framework. It's to give you the ability to ensure that you're doing things ethically and ensuring accountability, etc. And one of the big parts is risk management. It's a brand new world for everybody, I feel, AI, and I know there are people like Sarah who've been working it for a long time, but the majority of people are quite new to this. We're quite used to understanding health and safety risks. You know, we all know that if you go on the roof of a building, you're going to have to put a scaffolding around it to make sure that you don't fall off. And we all know that when you go skydiving, you have a spare parachute. But do we all know how to deal with risk for AI? So what the standard does is it gives you that framework to allow you to understand risk management, allow you to build the risk management in a way that's balanced and right for you. The resulting outcome, hopefully, it's going to build some reputation, it's going to build trust, it's going to ensure compliance and definitely a competitive advantage. The one thing that I would say is this is absolutely new. This is something that's been talked about only for a couple of years, and it's been something that's only been available for a number of weeks. So if you do want a competitive advantage, then it is something that you can jump on pretty quickly and you can move forward with, and you can then be able to sit there and tell your clients, your partners, your stakeholders that actually you do have something that very few people in the world will have at this point in time. We can move on to the next standard, the next slide. So what does it look like? We're going to run into it in a bit more depth in a second, but for those of you, 80% of you have currently got existing standards in place. There is a set of mandatory clauses, so it follows the Annex SL structure, and we'll come back to that in a second. For those of you who operate things like ISO 9001 or 14001 or 45001, that's where your document would end. So that's exactly the same. It's very, very structured similarly, and we'll talk about that in a second. For those of you that are used to ISO 27001, you therefore have an understanding of what an Annex A is. An Annex A is a list of technical controls. You're quite lucky with 42001 in that there are only 38, not 93, and we're going to run through what they actually look like. And then there are 3 other annexes which provide you with information. They're not things that you get certified to. It's not controls that you have to implement. It's all about guidance to make sure that you are in a better place. For those of you that do operate 27001, you're quite used to having a separate document called 27002 that has all the guidance in it. This time they were able to include it all in one document, which, if it does nothing other than saves you a couple of £100 every time you need to buy one, it's always a good thing to just have it all in one place. So that's what the 42001 looks like from an overview. If we just break it down into a bit more granular detail, if we can move to the next slide, please. Just go back one. Perfect. So I talk about the Annex SL, and I do apologise to the people that have been using ISO standards for many years now, because they will be very used to this. So clause 4, context of the organisation as it's known, it's all talking about things like who do we impact, who impacts us, how do we fit within this world. It's quite straightforward, and that will be very common across all of the different standards that you may hold. Similarly with clause 5, very, very similar, it talks about things like leadership and putting policies in place and roles. And again, if you've already got existing ISOs in place, the chances are they're going to be very, very common. Clause 6 is the first place where we see something different. And clause 6 talks about planning as a heading, but actually it's planning of risk, really. It's planning of risk and opportunity. So here's where you start talking about things like AI risk assessments. Once you've done a risk assessment, it's talking about AI risk treatment. And it's also talking about AI impact assessment. When we look at the other standards, like, for example, 27001, we're quite used to the terminology of risk assessment and risk treatment. What 42001 has done is it's actually taken that to a step further now and started to talk about impact assessments to understand how it's going to impact people. So clause 6 is quite new. And if you've got other ISO standards, that would be the first point really where it starts to feel like there is something new and different for you. Clause 7, very similar to the other ISOs, talking about resources, training, competence, communication, those sorts of things. And once we get to clause 8, again, this is the second point where you start to see the change. And really simply, lots of clients often come to me and say, can you give us a bit more in understanding of clause 8? And my honest answer is just, whatever you said you were going to do in clause 6 when you planned, you're now going to implement operationally. So this is about implementing your risk assessment. It's about implementing your risk treatment. It's about implementing your impact assessments. Nothing more than that, quite straightforward. Clause 9 and 10, same as the other standards. So it's all about monitoring, audits, management review, continually improving, those sorts of things. So if we move on to the Annex A, just move one slide forward. Brilliant. So the Annex A control, as I said, there's 38 of them. So for those of you that are operating 27001 2022, you've been used to 93. For those of you that are operating with the old 2013 standard, you've been used to 114. So this might seem a little bit more straightforward. Does actually make it difficult if you're operating 27 and 42 at once to understand initially, because the Annex A is actually structured in a very similar way to the old 27001 Annex A, where you had chapters and then you had subclauses, as opposed to the way that the new one is currently. So if you physically see the document written out, you'll notice straight away that it looks very similar to the 27001 2013, not the 2022 version. There's also a little bit of complexity with the numbering. For those of you that have a copy of it or have read a copy of it, you'll notice that a lot of the numbers start from A2.2 rather than A2.1. So it does take a little bit of getting used to, but there's nothing too difficult in there. Just to run through quickly, A2 talks about policies, but it's not just about AI policies. It's about understanding how that actually interacts with your other policies. So you could have HR policies, you could have InfoSec policies, you could have lots of policies within the business, and it's understanding whether any of them interact with your AI and the way that you're using AI. A3 is all about roles and responsibilities, quite straightforward. A4 is all about resources, so that's not just things like systems, it's also things like data resources, documentation, people. What people do you need to be able to effectively implement your AI? It's also about tooling, a term that we probably haven't come across in ISO before, but this tooling is nothing to be scared of. It's really just talking about things like platforms, data analysis, model building, testing, those kind of things. It's the resources that you use to help you build your AI system if you're going to build your own. A5, assessing the impacts, very similar to the AI impact assessment that we talked about before. A6, life cycle. It's interesting to note that this is the only one that splits into two subsections, and one is specifically about development, and the other half of A6 is specifically about the stages of the life cycle. A7 talks about data, so the quality of data, the preparation, what you need to do with the data before you start to use it, and data provenance, knowing where the data is coming from in the first place. A8, information for interested parties. I always love this term, interested parties, that ISO use frequently. Literally, interested parties is anybody that affects your system or anybody that your system affects. So what information do we need to give them? Some people, depending on how you're implementing your AI, are going to need a lot of information. Other people are going to need a lot less, depends on how it's done. So the standard gives you controls and actually helps you build that so that you know exactly what's going to be right for the different people. A9, use of. It's the one thing that we all want to get to, is the use of it. Rather than thinking about the risks, you know, the fruit is definitely going to be in the using of it. So how do we process and use it responsibly? How do we make sure that we set objectives? And something that I've never seen so much with ISO before is there's a section called intended use, and it goes on to talk about misuse, because we also have to understand that when we're giving people these tools, there is a potential for them to misuse them. And if we think back through history, you know, when we've developed some of the great medications, they've turned into misuse. When we've developed some of the great information security techniques, they've then turned into misuse. And again, we're having to start thinking about it from an AI point of view. And then the last one, third party customer relationships. So where this differs from a lot of ISO is it starts to talk about allocating responsibilities. Now, if you've had any ISO in the past, you'll be quite used to roles and responsibilities, and you say who's going to be looking after your quality management system or your InfoSec management system. Where this one's very different is it's not just looking internally at who are taking those different roles, because with AI, there is an understanding that actually quite a lot of these roles are probably going to be people outside. So they could be customers, they could be suppliers, they could be partners. So it's actually talking about allocating responsibilities. And I think there's quite a differentiator there between the way that other ISOs are written. So 38 controls, nothing too difficult there. And the one thing that's most important, don't get too afraid, is that it's actually all risk-based and it's all about implementing in a way that's right for you. So if you're a one-man band who's an electrician, who's using it to improve the way that you word your emails, or whether you're an organization who's developing your own AI to, I don't know, solve issues with cancer, you know, the way that you implement it, it's the same document, it's the same pages, it's the same controls, but implemented in a way that's absolutely different. And that's the key to everything, is making sure that it's implemented in the right way for you. We can move on a slide. So I wanted to put this up because I was aware, and I recognized quite a few of the names actually that are on the webinar today from ISO 27001 webinars that we've done in the past and customers. So we wanted to look at what were the benefits of having them and how do they align? Actually very, very closely. So talking about confidentiality, with 27001, you're solely looking at confidentiality to talk about information, whereas for 42001, you are talking about the enhanced trust and accountability across everything, the way that your AI is implemented. They both look at risk mitigation, identifying risks and mitigating them. 27001 is trying to do that to reduce security breaches. 42001 is very much doing that to make sure that the AI is implemented in a way that's right. Regulatory compliance is pretty standard across the two of them, in fairness. Providing clients with peace of mind, stakeholder confidence, sharpen your edge to win more business. All of these things are very, very similar across the two. And what I would say is, one is just solely focusing on information security, and one is focusing on AI. But actually, the way that the two integrate is quite surprising, just how closely they align on things like that. If we can move on to the next slide. So the question of who is 42001 for? And I thought when I was trying to write this slide, a good way of starting point was to look at what we call the roles. As with everything in this world, we have legislators and we have the people who write the standards, and I'm quite sure that they didn't speak to each other, as they never seem to. So they came up with roles, and they came up with names, and they came up with descriptions, but did they align them? Not at all. So the 42001 starts talking about different types of roles for things like providers, producers, customers, and partners, and you can read on the screen there what that means. We're fully aware that a lot of people are just going to be customers. So that's people who are just using an AI. Whereas the EU AI Act starts talking about providers and importers and distributors and deployers. And actually, there is quite a bit of conflict in the naming and the terminology of where they work. So overall, what is 42001 for? What I would say is actually for anybody. Anybody who is switching on an AI to help them do a task, or using AI in any shape or form, 42001 is going to give you the framework to help you make sure that you implement it in a way that's right and safe. And so often, as Sarah mentioned before, I think there's probably a lot of people who are on the call today that probably don't even realize they use an AI, but probably are. You know, things like Amazon Alexas or Siri's on our phones we've been used to for many years now, but also lots of our other programs, things like HubSpot or accounting packages, they're all introducing AI now. So it may well be that you don't even realize you're a customer of AI right now, when actually you might be using it quite a lot. So anybody who's currently using AI, 42001 can be implemented for. If we can move to the next slide. So what are the benefits? We've covered many of these, so I won't read them verbatim off the screen, but security, trust, all of those sorts of things. One that's important, I think, is cost savings. And often, as I said at the start of this presentation, I've done ISO for many years now, and regularly clients would say ISO is a cost, and I would say actually it's a saving. Because often people will say, actually, I want to cut back, I don't want to spend any money, I don't want to implement an ISO, I'm going to just wing it. I'm going to try and do it myself. And what you normally find is you try and do it yourself, and then either you have issues or you have to go back and do it again. Or it's very rare to get something right the first time. When you look at an ISO standard, as much as people like myself get frustrated that they take years and years to write, there's a reason why they take years and years to write, because lots of people who have lots of knowledge spend many, many opportunities in reviewing it, improving it, and tweaking it so that it's right for you. If it's the first time you've ever implemented an AI and you're trying to think about how we're going to deal with risk, I guarantee that implementing 42001 will save you money in the long run, not cost you money. Customer satisfaction, global recognition, very much so. As I mentioned, there's not many people in the world. As far as I'm aware, to my knowledge at the time of this webinar, I only know of 2 organizations in the world who have achieved 42001, and they were actually the 2 that we used as the test bed to enable the final version of the standard to be written. I'm not aware of anybody that has actually achieved it since it became a product. So if you do want to jump on and become one of the first, it's something that we can definitely help you with. We can move on to the next slide. So that takes us nicely into how to become certified. The first thing, have a conversation, reach out, chat to us. I spent yesterday evening on a call with a client who was looking at different ISOs, wanted to understand how it fitted within their journey. I don't work in the sales department in any way, shape or form, but I was able to work with the sales team and the technical team to talk to the client about how it worked well with their organization. And we're more than happy to spend that time talking about how it fits for you. This isn't a product that you just tick a box and give your credit card number to. It's very much about us understanding your organization and you understanding how this works for you. Once you've done that, how does it move forward? The first stage that we get involved in, and something that I'm involved in, and so a lot of my colleagues, is the consultancy and gap analysis. We literally take the standard and we take every line, word for word, all 166 pages of it, and we read each line and we say, is the organization already doing something that meets that requirement? Do they need to do anything different from what they're already doing? Or do they need to start doing something brand new that they've never done before? And we start to identify gaps. And we'll identify gaps into 3 different phases, ones that we're going to fix for you, ones that you need to fix before you can get certified, and ones that you can fix after certification. So we do that gap analysis with you, and we'll work with the client for a number of days, depending on the size of the organization, to do that consultancy. We then develop your management system. So we actually build your system for you, so that you then have the actual structure of the management system. And we will also, if we've identified any gaps that you need to address before certification, in that stage 3, we'll work with you to sort that out. We'll work with you to make sure that they can all be completed. And the last stage is pre-certification audit. You get audited, somebody like myself turns up, whether that's in person, whether that's over Teams. We turn up and we do a pre-certification audit with you. We audit all the gaps that have been identified that needed to be completed before the certificate. So it's not an audit of absolutely everything, it's an audit of the things that we've identified. And at the end of the day, you can go home and open your bottle of champagne, your bottle of wine, because congratulations, you are now certified in 42001. All I would say, don't drink too much wine or champagne, because that's where the work really starts. Achieving the qualification and achieving the certification is amazing, but don't then put it to the bottom drawer and hope that you can roll it out in 11 months to get your annual audit. It's something that you need to be working with on a regular basis every day. And if we can just move to the next slide. So why work with us? I won't read it exactly as it is on the screen, but the first one talks about consultancy. It's bespoke. As I mentioned to you earlier, it's the same document whether you are a one-man band or whether you've got 5,000 employees. It's the same document whether you're using ChatGPT to help you word an email or whether you've developed your own AI that can retain and deal with cancer and healthcare issues and whatever. So if it's the same document, and if we're trying to make sure that it's built in a way for you, that's where the key is. That's where the expertise comes in. That's where the years and years of doing this for hundreds, if not thousands of different companies, we're able to make sure that we can bespoke that in a way that's right for you. So it makes it simple, it makes it compliant, and it makes it appropriate. And I think for me, the important thing there is appropriate. Part of something bigger, Flora mentioned at the start that we're actually part of a large group, and there's many different facets of that group that can help you. And we hope that together we can actually be better for you guys. And the last thing is technology. We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort building a technology platform behind it that allows us to build your management system in that system so that you can then manage all of your ISO work, whether it's one standard or whether it's 5 different standards within the single platform, and try and get rid of repetitive things that don't need to happen. So that's a quick run through of 42001.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. Really comprehensive as ever. You have a few questions on the back of it, which we were thinking would be the case. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll just start from the top. So first one we've got here, can we start work towards ISO 42001, for example, by presenting certain policies in our 27001 audits? Would citation encourage the security aspects of AI integration to be explored in 27001 compliance, and even just as a more extended conversation surrounding the risk landscape?
Okay. Quite a few different parts to that question. So if you've currently got 27001, you're having to obviously consider your information security. If as an organization you're utilizing AI in any way, shape or form, then you will have to consider AI as a part of your 27001, not to achieve 42001 certification, but solely to make sure that you are remaining compliant to 27001, because AI in itself has a number of different risks. So if you already have 27001 and you're using AI in any way, shape or form, yes, you're going to have to do some work to make sure that you've updated, tweaked your system, potentially added additional policies to make sure that you remain compliant to 27001. If you want to achieve 42001, and I would really promote the achieving it, because what I often say to clients is if you've gone to all that extent of doing things properly, if you've made sure that you're complying with all the legislation, if you've done all the risk analysis, if you've done all the treatment implementation, you've gone to all of this effort, do you not deserve the certificate as well? So if you are considering going 42001, you obviously have the opportunity to build that yourself. You can go onto the website, you can onto the internet, you can download a copy of the standard, you'll have to pay for it, it's rather costly, and then you can go ahead and build your own management system. And I'm quite sure that there are companies and potentially customers on the call today who are likely to do that. For the majority of customers, it's probably something that they will look to work with us more on. So that's where we talk about the conversation of asking how we can implement, how we can assist in implementing that for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. That's great. Okay. So it said slide about rules showed the EU rules are different to the ISO rules. Which set of rules are we in the UK expected to follow?
Lovely question. I'm not sure whether that's for me or Sarah, if I'm honest.
Let me chip in on this one. I've got a view. We may disagree. Let's find out. No, so I don't think they're as different as they seem at first glance, right? I think most of what we're talking about fall into what we think of as, I put them into two buckets, right? Did you build it, or are you just turning it on? And I think there are roles in both of those. Like, you're going to know if you're specifically importing things. Some of these things are really fine, specific details that probably don't apply to you. But are you building an AI system from scratch, or are you just switching Salesforce Einstein on? That's the distinction, because those are going to have really different types of risks that you need to think about. And I think both the EU AI Act and ISO 42001 handle that distinction in an appropriate way. So, the EU AI Act only applies if you're dealing with EU citizens or trying to put a product into Europe or anything like that. But it's also good practice. So if you are doing good practice, if you have good management systems, well, then that's going to be compliant with ISO 42001 as well.
Just another thing I would point out, it's not uncommon for standards to not align in terminology with legislation. If we think that the ISO standard has been written for worldwide adoption, and there's whatever there is, 350 different countries in the world who might write different pieces of legislation, there's no way we're going to get everybody to align on the terminology. So even though the terminology can seem quite different to start with, like Sarah says, once you actually get down to the nitty-gritty, there's not huge differences between them. But it is mainly because they're addressing different things.
Brilliant, thanks guys. Okay, somebody's asked it as well. Connor's asked, would the ISO 42001 work in line with CQC compliance?
Interesting one. I've not spoken with CQC with regards to 42001, and I think CQC would probably not be looking at ways of approving or with regards to the standard. I think they'd be more inclined to talk about the use of AI in the way that you're dealing with clients. So the way that I would approach that is that you would need to speak to the Care Quality Commission to talk about the use of AI with your customers, with your staff. But I'm quite sure that when the Care Quality Commission are sitting there and trying to identify, is AI a good thing in our industry, if you were able to demonstrate that you were certified to a worldwide recognized standard, I think that it's going to do nothing but help your case to be able to operate that. But I do think it's just a little bit too soon for CQC to be standing up and saying, yes, we like it, or no, we don't. It just takes them a little bit longer to get around to that sort of answer.
Yeah, agreed. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so talking about ISOs 9 and 14, and then somebody's saying 27 sits separately, then 42 separately again, or can all four standards be integrated?
They can definitely be integrated. We have to look at from a technical or from a practical base, it can be different for different clients. So if, for example, you were an organization, you had a quality manager and you had an environmental manager and you had an InfoSec manager and you had an AI manager, then you would probably want separate management systems to allow them to have the role and responsibility to manage their own. If you're a smaller organization and one person's wearing all 4 hats, then you would definitely want to integrate it. The way that we as an organization are looking at implementing it, you can have it right now as a standalone, and we are looking at implementing different IMSs to allow people to integrate. If you've already got systems, let's have a conversation. How that looks, what that looks like, it's going to be different for every single person. But from a technical point of view, absolutely they can be integrated.
Great, thank you. Sarah, I've got one for you. So why is it called ISO 42001? Is that a reference?
Yeah, so I absolutely love that. So some of you may be familiar with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series of books. I think they were actually on my slide of what AI isn't. We're not quite there yet. In the books, the advanced civilization builds a supercomputer to answer the question, what is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? And the answer is 42. So I'm absolutely delighted that ISO has a little bit of a sense of humor in that one.
It's also worth pointing out on that the way that ISO work with regards to naming of standards is they have families of standards. So there's lots of standards that start with 14 and they're all around environmental, and there's lots of standards that start with the number 9 and they're all around quality. If you actually look at the 42001, the opening line is information technology, and every other information technology one starts with 27. So it was really interesting that for the first time ever, they seemed to go out of their way to change the naming convention. So whether it was due to that particular instance or not, unless I meet them and speak to them privately, I'm probably not sure, but I love the idea that that's exactly why it's called that.
You know exactly what the standard's about as soon as you see the number.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. And other one for you, Sarah, is how do you think the UK will adopt the EUIA Act, if at all?
I think it's going to be really similar to how we've dealt with GDPR. Either we're going to sort of really align to it, or we're going to just kind of have to follow it anyway, because a lot of UK companies will still be operating in Europe. So those companies will do it. Those regulatory bodies will pick those up from those companies that they're working with, and that will spread through the UK. So I think, again, having this international standard that you can say, yep, this is my ISO certification, is just gonna solve that problem, whether you're looking at it from a UK perspective or an EU perspective.
Brilliant, thank you, fantastic. Okay, one here from Stephen. As a provider, one of the challenges of ISO 42001 compared to, for example, 45001 is the technology progression and creativity of developers is off the scale. It's like a Formula One team constantly coming up with new ideas, which the rulebook sometimes retrospectively addresses. Whilst risk management and impact assessments are critical, do you think the standard can keep pace and be effective?
Wow, that sounds like a question that I've asked at a number of forums for the last few years. And to address it, so the way that ISO normally works is they release a standard, and then they normally wait for a period of 2 to 3 years when they will then they'll then put the working party back together, the group, and they will then start working on improvements, tweaks, changes. And the second version of the standard normally comes out anywhere between around 7 years to what we saw with 27001. It took 10 years or 9 years before it was finally released. So do I think that they'll wait 9 years for 42001? No, I don't. And for a number of reasons, I don't. 27001 has always just been an evolution of something before it. So the 2022 version was an evolution of 2013, which was an evolution of 2005, which was an evolution of BS 7799. So therefore, because it became an evolution of something, it wasn't brand new. 42001 is absolutely brand spanking new. And therefore, is it to be expected that we could wait 7 to 10 years for an update? I personally think that's unrealistic. Do I think it'll be quick? No, I don't. And when you actually start to read the standard, and the reason I laugh when I hear the question is I genuinely asked exactly that question 2 years ago. When you read the way the standard's been written, it's not about telling you specific ways of doing risk assessments or specific ways of doing impacts. It's asking you to think about ways of doing it. It's giving you that framework, and those frameworks are not going to change. So if we look at 27001, even though between 2013 and 2022, technology moved huge. You know, in 2013, no one really was using clouds. And in 2022, 80% of the world is now using cloud storage. But it didn't mean that we couldn't implement ISO 27001 in 2020 or 2021, because the standards are written in a very clever way of being applicable to everybody, and also being able to stand the test of time. So I don't think it's something that next year we're going to see a new version of, but I don't think it's going to be 2034 before we get the next one.
Great, thank you. Okay, Connor's asking, what would be the best AI system to use in line with 42001?
If I cover the technical bit from a 42, and then I'll let Sarah talk about different AI systems. Far more experience of AI than I have. With regards to 42001, it's not about choosing a system that's right for the standard. The standard is a thought process and a management system that makes sure whatever you use, you have considered the risks. Now, with that said, if you go and buy an AI package off a guy that you met at the pub and you've never heard of them and you've never understood who they are, there's probably going to be a lot more work in 42001 to make sure you've considered all the risks. If you're going out and buying something that's mainstream, or you're implementing something that's mainstream in a way that many other people have done, the chances are they've already put those sorts of things in place. Therefore, the actual risk process is probably much easier. So 42001, it's not a case of let's go and buy an AI that fits, but it is worth considering where you're going, and how big they are and how long they've been running before you take it, just so you're aware there might be a bit more work involved otherwise. And Sarah might be able to take you through.
Yeah, so I don't think there's likely to be sort of one AI system, right? As we're seeing, it's popping up in lots of different places. When we think about here is a thing that end-to-end uses AI to either enhance or sometimes automate decisions, right? That's popping up in a lot of places. So you're probably going to have like fractional bits on your asset register, right? You're probably going to have Salesforce Einstein and Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT for these uses, right? So it's not like you go out and choose a cloud provider and everything is in that cloud provider. You're going to be using AI in the future in lots of different ways, and you need to consider the risks and impacts of that all over the place. On any one specific technology, there will be lots of views, but in terms of a single AI system, until we get to Skynet, I don't think that's going to be there.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Okay, and one of the other questions we got, Peter, which thanks for you. How long will it take to become certified? How long does it take somebody?
I think on one of the slides, it actually mentioned certification within 45 days. I often laugh when I speak to the sales team and they tell clients that. Clients seem to think that from the first conversation, they'll be certified within 45 days. And trust me, if you really needed to be, could we do that? Yes, we could. But in the real world of the way that things work, because of availability of staff, because of just time, you're really looking at something in the order of about 3 months from start to finish. Having the conversation with us, arranging all the contracts in place, us getting all the information we need, doing the consultancy work with you, building the management system, getting that quality checked internally before it comes to you, and then closing out with an audit. As you'll appreciate, we're not sitting here twiddling our thumbs hoping that someone's going to want this. We're all really busy people, and therefore there can sometimes be a wait of a few weeks before we're able to do a consultancy. So I would say my experience, on average, from start to finish, from having a conversation with us to having your certificate and your glass of champagne, work on 3 months, and you won't be far wrong.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great. Okay, and because I've got another couple of questions to do, what I want to just put up, because I know from a time perspective, I get it's Friday afternoon, people will have other things in their diary potentially, but I just want to pop on there. If you want to hear more about 42001, then please let us know and we'll follow that up. If you want the recording, you will be followed up anyway after today's event, because we just want some feedback, and if there's anything else you want to ask, whatever else, please do not hesitate at that point to ask for the recording. So when somebody gives you a call on the back of today's event, then please do ask them for the recording, and they will get that arranged to get sent over to you. No problem at all. Mark, I can see you would like me chat with Peter, so that's fine. Mark, if you can just make sure that you have popped your email address in for us, that'd be grand, or send it directly to Peter or myself, that would be perfect. If anybody else does want to have have a chat, have a conversation, then don't hesitate to let us know. More than happy to have arranged that call for you to have a chat in a bit more depth, to get a bit more understanding, see what works for you, etc, etc. So please don't hesitate just to pop that in the chat, and we will pick that up directly with you, or Peter and Sarah will pick that up directly, most likely to be Peter or one of the teams, so we can arrange that for you. That's great. Okay, so further, the costings was one of the questions as well, Peter, but I'm guessing that's something you need to pick up in an individual.
It's absolutely impossible to be able to give a costing, because we've got clients who've got 30 different offices in 10 different countries with 3,000 people, and we've got people who are one-man band working from home. So it is very much about having a conversation and working out what's right for you.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Somebody also asked as well, does this replace 9001?
No, 9001 is all about quality. 42001 is all about AI in exactly the same way as 27001 is all about information security, and 14001 is all about environmental. They are all frameworks, they are all management systems, but with key differentiators as to what they're aiming at. So if you were to implement 14001, you're making sure that you're protecting the environment wherever possible, and you've considered all of your environmental impacts. Implement 42, you're considering all your AI. Implement 9000, you're considering all of the issues around quality.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, I can see a few of you popping your email address or whatever in there, so that's perfect. If you want to have a wee bit further chat, then please don't hesitate to pop that in there. As I say, somebody will follow you up anyway, but if you want that follow-up, just to check we've got the right address and everything for you, that'd be great. But thank you once again to Peter and Sarah for joining us. As ever, it's been a really insightful and valuable session today. So thank you both for joining us for that. Thank you to all our attendees who've joined us today, much appreciated as well, and I hope it's been useful. I can see by all the thank yous and saying it was very informative that hopefully that's it has been and been useful to you, because it's valuable time out your day, which we appreciate, so we appreciate you joining us for it. But yeah, anything further from yourself, Peter or Sarah, before we bring it to an end?
Say thanks to everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, I'll leave that chat box open for another minute or so. If anybody does want to pop their emails in there just for the follow-up. But as I said, somebody will be giving you a wee buzz anyway to follow up on today's event. So please do let them know at that stage if you want today's recording. But thank you for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you really soon. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.